Hello and welcome again to another episode of One Starfish, where our mission is to change the world one starfish or one person at a time. As always, make sure to rate, review, subscribe. I love the reviews. Keep coming. And really excited for our guest today. Mike and I met on a plane to Paraguay with John Maxwell, and he's a pastor, husband, father, probably not quite in that order, it's probably like husband, father, pastor, and serial entrepreneur doing some amazing things. His church has been rated the fastest growing church in America for 5 years in a row, which is, I think, a pretty cool accomplishment. He started in the ministry at age 15, which is a story in and of itself. So I'm really excited for that. But yeah, welcome to the show, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Just when you said we met on a plane with John Maxwell headed to Paraguay, that was a crazy sentence in and of itself.
As I was saying it, I was like, that is kind of crazy.
Yeah, like we're living that kind of life. But, I think that there's those divine appointments, right? And so my hope is that as we're like kind of talking and sharing that, some people realize that they didn't click on this on accident and that there's something that they were supposed to hear in this conversation. Just like I believe we met for a reason. And this is kind of an extension of that.
I agree 100%. So let's dig into, because I just think it's a cool story, a little bit of like how you got into the ministry and, where you started the vision, where you see it. A little bit about you. Just tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah. Well, I'm a huge fan of autobiographies, biographies. I know probably your listeners are as well, because you can glean things from people's lives. I think that our lives serve as the best lesson that we offer, because you are what you do, not just what you say. And for me, I was raised fatherless. And I'm the oldest of 5 children. My mother had multiple marriages. And so just a lot of trauma and pain, which unfortunately is really, really common nowadays. I was raised in a trailer park in South Chicago. So I come from very humble beginnings. But it was actually when I was 15 years old, I searched the scriptures from cover to cover, Genesis to Revelation, about 4 times as a teenager. And that 5th time all the way through, I got to the book of Acts and just saw this massive transformational experience in this guy Peter's life. And I remember thinking like, God, if it's possible to do this in Peter's life, do it in mine too. And because really Peter was a blue collar fisherman. Jesus rebuked him. Jesus literally, his mentor said, "Get thee behind me, Satan," which is pretty harsh.
Right.
And then Peter denies Christ 3 times. And then yet in Acts chapter 2, he steps up and he preaches this sermon and thousands of people accept Christ in one moment. And you just see this crazy next level situation where he becomes an apostle. And I remember saying like, wow, transformation is possible. And so that for me at 15 was like a major realization. Like I don't have to live like those who've come before me. I believe in every single family that there's somebody destined to be the breaker, somebody that says we're going to take our lineage to the next level. And at 15, I was like, I'm going to be that person.
Wow,
so that's kind of how it started.
So crazy. And then you've been a serial entrepreneur and you've gone along. Tell us a little bit about some of the struggles as you've gone through. Right now you're at a point where people would say you're, quote, successful, whatever that means. But like, tell us some of the struggles as you got into entrepreneurship, into building a church, with friends that maybe doubted what you were doing. Just talk about some of that.
Yeah, I think the biggest enemy that we all have is ourselves. It's real easy to blame other people. And growing up the way I did in the environments I did, it was like always blaming someone else, the person who abused you, the person who traumatized you, the person who gossiped about you or spoke about you. And there's probably some entrepreneurs listening right now who are blaming their employees. It's the employees' fault. They're the ones. And one of the most important lessons that I learned early on is that it's the enemy of me. Like I am my own barrier. I am my own limitation. And, one of the things that I do is I travel all around the world doing events where I encourage people to actually forgive everybody who's ever hurt them. And I say forgiveness is you're not necessarily condoning their actions. Forgiveness is so that you can be free. And so I had to go through a long journey of forgiveness. I think this is the point in entrepreneurship that we don't talk about. Like, it's not always your IQ, it's your EQ. So there's always such an emphasis placed on your intelligence, but it's your emotional intelligence, your emotional quotient, your EQ matters more than your IQ. Most people that I've met that have made millions and millions of dollars, they weren't necessarily smarter than me. They were just more emotionally healthy to sustain all of the attacks and to sustain the stress and the emotional. And so what I started to realize is that I was raised in poverty, and a lot of poverty is centered around emotional trauma, emotional pain, not being able to sustain success, self-sabotage. Mm-hmm. So in the early days of entrepreneurship, I was launching these businesses because I never, this is like a weird side note, but I had never saw a full-time pastor before. So because I was raised in like the south side of Chicago, it was every pastor that I ever had was bivocational, meaning they had a job and then they also served the local church. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to figure out what are some things I can do that make money, but don't take me away from ministry as much. So then I started thinking more in an entrepreneurial way. And so in the early days, it was like, I love to write. So I was doing grant writing, and then I would be like, oh man, and then I started migrating through the phases of entrepreneurship because I was like, wait a second, I'm now becoming more emotionally healthy. I'm sustaining this. I'm making money, but there's only one of me. So I can make more money if I can scale it through employing people. And then I had to learn a new set of skills. It wasn't just me doing the work. It was me doing it through someone. And all that it took to keep that person healthy emotionally and sustain their energy. Then it was like, okay, can I scale to another level? Can I put a supervisor or a manager over that employee and then lead through them to someone else? And I remember like going through those early experiments in my 20s. And it was funny because I was like, oh, I get it. It starts with me. And then once I've learned how to lead myself, now I can lead others. And then now I'm leading leaders. And once I found those repeatable patterns, I was like, wait a second, it's not about grant writing. It's not about, back in the day, I used to do like website arbitrage. So I would watch like Jersey Shores and all these reality shows. And when one of the characters would say something like wild, I would buy the .com for it and then sell that because people would be searching it and looking for it. And I was like starting to realize it's not about what you do. It's about how you do it and why you do it. And you can repeat these processes and you can repeat these formulas. And so that's kind of was the journey of my 20s, because I'm a first generation entrepreneur. I'm a first generation pastor. So pretty much like everything I've done has been this major experiment. And one of the biggest blessings of coming from the bottom is your worst case scenario is you just go back to the bottom. And so I found it like it was super liberating, where it was like, my worst case scenario is I go back to the trailer park. Like, I have nothing to lose because I started with nothing. And I think that's one of the blessings. So if somebody's listening right now, just fail forward. It's like, and I think for me, coming from where I came from, I was like, I'm still my worst day is better than someone else's best day, from where I come from. So it helped me in that. And so anyways, I'm still going through that. I'm still experimenting with it and trying to enjoy life through that process.
Oh, that's good. So you talked about, leading yourself, then you got to lead others, and then we can lead leaders. Just a little bit about leading leaders, and, what are some tips for someone that wants to get in leadership? You are running, the fastest growing church, which is massive. We were talking about that before. It's kind of like a volunteer army. You're not paying people to be there. So, what are some of the tips that you could give someone that, want to be in leadership and want to inspire people and grow and like all of that kind of stuff? What are some things that you learned to get to where you're at today?
Yeah, one of my biggest tips would be, in order to lead leaders, you have to imagine that you are, so if you're a male, imagine that you're a father. If you're a female, imagine that you're a mother, and the best mother or the best father that you could have ever had, and be that for people. That's the best way I can explain, like the easiest way to explain what leadership is it's a lifelong commitment. If you bring temporary expectations into that relationship dynamic, people feel that. But if you come in and you really treat them in your heart, and I mean, you don't have to vocalize this because it could get creepy and weird, but in your heart, you say like, I'm making a lifelong commitment to this person, and I'm going to act as if I'm fathering them, and I'm going to be consistent. I'm going to care about their wife and kids. I'm going to care about them on that next level. I'm going to care about it's a different dynamic, because essentially my goal is to tilt the table in the relationship where I lose. So when I'm leading leaders, I'm like, I lose. You're going to get the benefit of my strength and my energy and finances and a wealth of knowledge and wisdom that I have. And I'm going to tilt the table so that you win more than I win. And anytime the relationship dynamic goes the opposite direction, where you're saying, I'm leading leaders, but I want to make sure I win more than they win, then you're losing. You're going to lose. So in every single situation, now fast forward, I've got kind of a round table of companies, and that is the paradigm by which I lead. And it is sustaining success year over year, because I'm saying, like, ultimately my job is to ensure that they win more than I win. And in doing that, if you hire the right people and you're leading the right leaders, because, there are some narcissistic, emotionally unhealthy leaders. So like I'm doing all this with the presupposition that you hired the right people and that you're leading the right leaders. They will feel that, and they will reciprocate, and they will give you their best. And then you're going to be in a new cycle, a healthy cycle. And it's a healthy cycle of you trying to outgive each other. And to me, like, that is ultimately the sustainable model for success. Is I'm trying to tilt the table and ensure that the people that I'm leading are winning more than I lead, or winning more than I win. I'm loving them with the Father's heart, saying like, do I actually care about them as humans independent of my business? And do I care for their families? Like, is there a bigger picture? And then as I'm doing that, they're feeling it, and they're like, man, like, I'm a reasonable, good person, and I feel like Mike's giving me his best. So I want to reciprocate my best. And then I say, well, man, I want to reciprocate my best. I want to go further. And now we're creating this cycle of like trying to outserve each other. And that to me is an amazing thing. And I know not everybody listening is a Christian, but I really just explained the gospel. It's like Jesus is like, I'm going to give you everything. I'm going to die for you. I'm not asking for anything in return. You can't even earn it. You can't give it back. And then you're so overwhelmed with gratitude for his sacrifice that you're like, I just want to serve you. I want to give everything to you. And you can't. And so that's kind of the circuitry for success, in my opinion. Even for marriage, like my definition of marriage is two servants trying to outserve each other. Because like if you get married and my goal is like, you know what, I got an idea. My wife, Julie, I want her to serve me. Then that's the fastest route to failing a marriage, But then if I say, you know what, no, but back up. That's the main reason everybody gets married, is like, they're going to meet my physical needs. They're going to meet my emotional needs. They're going to meet my mental needs. And I'm going to marry this person so they meet all of my needs. That's why more than 50% of divorce or marriages end in divorce. If you marry, on the other hand, if you marry and you're saying, I want to meet all of their needs. Like, I actually want to devote my life to serving them. But then they mutually, and again, this is another presupposition, they're saying, I want to marry that person to serve and meet all their needs. Then you both will get your needs met by each other by, mutually serving each other. And to me, that's the hardest thing to do. But if you can create that circuitry, I mean, because one of the questions people ask me all the time is, why do people not leave your companies? Like you've had employees so much longer than and I'm like, that is the secret. It's the same reason why I've been married for 20 years. It's the same in a culture that doesn't sustain marriage. It's the same reason why my employees don't want to leave. It's because like we are engaged in this really ruthless competition to see who can outserve each other. And it sounds so simple, but most people are not emotionally healthy enough to do that. They're constantly thinking, how is this person taking advantage of me? How is this person, and so for me, I believe the best even when I see the worst. And then because there's mirror neurons, because all human beings are basically wired to mirror the behavior of the other person, people are like mirrors. And so like if I see the worst, but I believe the best, then what happens is I'm acting in such a way that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's like I'm assuming that you are doing the right thing and that you want to and that you want to do the right thing, and so I'm going to make people behave in such a way rather than assuming that they're backstabbing me and taking advantage of me, which when you have bosses and leaders and managers like that, ironically, even if they have a kind-hearted, good person under their leadership, they will sometimes manifest those behaviors in the people under them because those people will say, well, they already think I'm doing it and they already treat me like I am. And so like there's a lot of sabotage going on. And I think one of the biggest messages that I have for people listening right now is you're the problem. But then that's actually empowering because you're the solution.
Right. No, I just love that because I mean, it's kind of it is a servant leadership, and it's such an interesting concept that's talked about a lot. Have you, like listening to it, I'm like, you really got to take your ego out of everything also. So have you ever, struggled with that? Like, how did you get to where you're at in that thought process? Do you remember, like, how could people help themselves get there? Because they're like, that sounds so good, but like even I'm listening, I'm like, deep down I'm pretty selfish, so I try to be a giver, but I'm pretty selfish. So what are some things that can help someone actually shift from being selfish and ego to actually being a servant leader and giver?
Yeah, that is such a great question. I mean, here's the reality. Your ego is like a zombie, and like you kill it and then it comes back, and you kill it and it comes back, and you kill it and come back. Like anybody who tells me like I dealt with ego and I never dealt with it again is like sociopathic, So like we all have ego, and that's why we have to die to our ego daily. It's like, all right, I gotta kill it again today. But I also think that like we're seeing anxiety increase exponentially in our society. Mm-hmm. I think it's partly because the more you focus on yourself, the greater possibility that your anxiety will increase, and so it's actually incredibly liberating to say, I'm going to devote my life to the legacy of others, and that will be my legacy. And because when you help other people get what they want, you'll always get what you want. It's like that. So my thing is like, once I learned that, I was like, oh, there's a principle in the universe of sowing and reaping. And so there's seed given to the sower. So it's like, this has to leave my hand. I have to give, I have to serve other people. And I think just reminding myself my sanity is in my serving. Like actually, the more that I die to self, the more the ego that I kill, the more that I make it about other people, the more sane that is my medicine. Mm-hmm. And reminding myself of that, like it's just, and so for me, it's like a daily thing. And of course, we all have our struggles with it, but then once you get into the rhythm of it, once you get into the practice of it, like, and that's why I started with the dad analogy or the mom analogy. It's almost like I now get more satisfaction out of watching other people succeed than I do succeeding. So it's like, it becomes that proverbial parent on the sidelines, and your kid like scores a goal and you're like, yes, and you get an exhilaration from watching them succeed. Because the other thing too about being an entrepreneur or being a leader is your body can't, and this is my own philosophy, your body gets to a point where you can't feel the difference between $1 million and $3 million. Like you can't, it becomes like so ambiguous at a certain point. And so like that initially, I think when you're breaking barriers and like, oh, I'm self-employed, this is crazy. Like I woke up at noon and nobody yelled at me, or, you like there's an exhilaration initially, or I can't believe it. Like right now I'm in $1 million house in New York City with my own parking. It's like, that's insane. I started life in a trailer park. Now I actually own a home in New York City where people live in apartments and high rises. And so this is all ridiculous. But then what happens is this becomes my new norm. And so you stop feeling it. And so like if you're chasing this intrinsic dopamine, rush or this exhilaration, like it will wear off and that will become your new norm. And I think that's why you see this phenomenon of successful people feeling so empty, because it's just like a finite game. So I think for me, that ego death, it's the healthiest way to sustain success, because you'll just get to the point where, you just get so used to all of it. Like, so I don't know if I helped with that, but like, so for me though, seeing somebody go from, I don't think I can do it, to a breakthrough moment, now they're accomplishing, that's my exhilaration, because that's infinite, because there's always more people that I can help and go through that process. And then when I help leaders lead leaders and they're like, I remember when you did this with me and now I'm doing this with them and I felt like you. It's like, you hear those kinds of things and you're like, oh, now that's eternal life, because I've replicated myself. So when I'm gone, I'm still here through replication, through mentorship. And I'm doing my best impression of God, and how he loves me. And I'm saying this from a Christian perspective, so I'm doing my best impression of like, this is the love of God. And then they're doing their best impression of me. But God still gets the credit. So like for me, that keeps me sane, that there's a peace in that lets me know that like I'm doing something bigger than myself. But ego is yourself. So that's fine. That's exhausting. That's anxiety ridden. But then when you're like, no, this is bigger than me, like this thing continues, it ripples through time. It's like, then, so there's something about that that's missing, I think, in society now. So a secular humanistic worldview is it's all about you. And a Judeo-Christian worldview is it's both. It's about you and it's not about you. And you have to learn how to live in that paradox. It's about you, but it's bigger than you. And so when you click into that mindset, you're like, oh, I'm both an individual and I'm a part of a collective, versus I'm just an individual. So I love that. And I live from that worldview. So when people are like, how did you hit fastest growing church in America? How do you do it all? I'm like, you want to hear the secret? I don't have a ministry. I give ministry away. I give it away. Jesus didn't have a ministry. He gave ministry away. Like I'm like one of the few pastors who doesn't think I have to do it all. And I'm actually less stressed out than the pastors with 50-person churches who are going to every hospital visit, praying for everybody. They're exhausting themselves. And I'm like, I'm just going to teach 50 people how to pray for each other, how to visit each other in the hospital, how to become leaders. And it's just a whole nother paradigm. And which I think looks more like first century Christianity than 21st century Christianity, and I think it's liberating.
I agree. Now, I'm going to kind of dive into something that, as you're going through that, one of the things about leading that I think is tough for people, like, you're working with all these amazing people, but do you remember times where you did pour into people? And I'm sure you do, because I'm sure you didn't have an easy ride the whole time. You poured into people and then they backstabbed, they quit, they were like the opposite of everything you hoped they would be. And then how did you keep your belief in people when people were proving you wrong and believing them, basically?
Yeah. So going back, this is such a great question, because everybody's had that happen. It can feel like a wasted investment. Like, man, I wasted my time. But again, that feeling reveals a motive. So if you say I wasted my time, then you were expecting a return. And that in and of itself is not the father's heart. And that's why I say go back to being a dad. So what I do, because again, you can ruin your whole investment just in the way that somebody exits. And so what I do is I tell people, I'll look them right in their eyes and I'll say, I'm going to leave the back porch light on for you. And that basically is my way of saying, you can go run, you can do your own thing. Like, hey, I'm going to bless you on the way out, because I have a abundance mindset, not a scarcity mindset, which means like, you can't steal from me. It's like when when you were in college and you go back to your mom and dad's house and you actually, you go into all their cabinets and you start raiding the refrigerator and you're putting everything in bags and you go, you didn't rob your parents' house. You can't steal from your parents because they're your parents. It's like, I'm just grocery shopping at my mom and dad's house. So I just have a mindset like that, where it's like, you can't steal from me. It's impossible. I'm your dad. Like, you're just grocery shopping. So bless you on the way out. And it just really screws people. It checkmates them, because it's like, I'm not going to engage in a cycle of violence and hate and a cycle of, you can't fight a spirit with the same spirit. Like Jesus would say, I don't cast out Beelzebub by the power of Beelzebub. So it's like, I'm not going to exchange gossip for gossip, fear for fear. You can't fight a spirit with the same spirit. So it's like, you have a scarcity mindset. I have an abundance mindset. You can't take from me, can't steal from me. And hey, I'm just going to leave the back porch light on. And what I'm telling you so many times, and this is why you can't judge whether or not your investment was successful in the moment, because sometimes seeds go down deep and they're germinating. So anyways, I've had people come back and a year later and apologize. 2 years later and apologize. That's one of my favorite things. And then when they apologize, I have another opportunity to show the father's heart, because I could say, I told you, I tried to stop you from it. I tried you. But instead I'm just like, I'm so glad that you were able to learn and you're better because of it and all that. And you just stay in that posture. And I've had so many leaders come back to me and they were just like, oh man, so my thing is being a Christian, a real Christian, you don't have the right to have enemies. That's literally what the Bible says. You just don't even have right to have enemies. So I just try to stay in that posture. And then there's some people who never get it, but I will tell you this. I think a lot of, when you go back to ego, because you were asking a question about ego, I think a lot of people, what happens is they want to prove it's not even about the individual you invested in. It's about the audience around them. And you don't want to prove to the audience, like, look, they were wrong. Look, this is not, But it's like, if I don't have to narrate it for people, let my success be the identifier. It's like, you're going to so over time, what happens is these people that leave and that, they try to destroy everything on their way out. And I feel like their investment was a waste. Over time, it just is like, wow, it's kind of weird, because Mike and his team just continue to increase in success. And that person never did. So it's like, let the best idea win. It's like, if you were right, it'll be really easily identifiable in 5 to 10 years. And if you weren't, then probably you'll start to see it. And if you don't see it, it's fine. Everybody else will anyways.
Wow, that's so good. What are some, so like, if anyone's listening, man, that's got to be, rewind that. Like, that's so good. And sometimes that takes a while to get to that point, I believe, for sure. But what are some things, like, you're, the fastest growing church? What are some tips to build that culture? Like, what are some things that you've done to create that culture within your church?
Yeah. So I tell this to people all the time. So we have 4 core values. And it's freedom, unity, generosity, and excellence. Every decision I make flows through just 4 core values. So when I decide, am I going to do this? I'm asking myself the question, will people become more generous as a result of me doing this? If the answer is no, we're not doing it. Will people experience freedom from addiction, from bondage, from mental, struggles? If the answer is no, we're not doing it. Can we do this with excellence? If the answer is no, we're not doing it. And then will this be a unifying force? So when we do this, will people unify? And if the answer is no, we're not doing it. So I've never had an argument with anybody. It's always them versus the values. So it's like, it's not me versus you, it's you versus the value. So it's like when I meet with people, I basically will tell them, hey, I see the way that you're acting, and this is antithetical to unity. This is anti-unity. So it's not me versus you, but it's you are creating disunity, and our core values unity. So I just try to flow everything through those 4 core values. And then everybody always asks, like, where did you get them from? And this is like a major mic drop moment. Those are the 4 core values of my life and my home. So when you go to V1 Church, any one of our campuses, and we have locations all across America, you are literally just in the institutionalized version of the Signorelli house. Because in my house, freedom, unity, generosity, and excellence is the culture of my house. And I think the problem is people try to make a culture for their company that's different than the culture from their home. And the culture of your home will always become the culture of your company because it's impartation. In other words, who you are, you can't hide it. Like you can pay tens of thousands of dollars to meet with analysts and strategists, and you can go into a think tank and you can come out with a strat ops, and they can be like, okay, we got it. Here's your 5 core values. But if that's not your identity will always overshadow and basically just destroy all of your corporate identity. So it's like it's simply irrevocable what I'm saying. So the reason why V1 Church like culturally works is because it's literally, I don't have to think like, what are the 4 core values of our company? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not striving to create. It's like, no, like I'm generous and in my own, like in real life, it's like, so I can create a culture of generosity because I'm doing it. I'm excellent. So like some would say anally retentive,
Excellent sounds way better.
Yeah. No, I'm not a perfectionist, but I do believe in doing things. Like I have a quote I live by. If like anything worth doing is worth overdoing. So like even this podcast, like, there's $150,000 worth of equipment over my shoulder right now. So like, if I'm anything worth doing is worth overdoing. So excellence for me is not perfection. So I don't feel suffocated by it. It's just like, hey, if I'm actually going to do it, I'm going to do it the best I can do it. And so anyways, I guess what I'm trying to say is I can't tell you how many pastors or company owners have these core values that they're trying to create culture, and they don't realize you just picked the wrong values because you're not those things. And if you'll just find out like what you really are, and that's the law of the lid that John Maxwell talks about, then it's so much easier to impart that to everybody. Just be known for that. Like, what are your strengths? Double down on your strengths and make those your core values, because that'll become your culture. And then, everything will start thriving.
I love that. So good. So for someone to raise their, like you talk about the law of the lid and culture and like, who you are, and who you are attracts what you have around you. What are some ways, because I get this question a lot, so I think you have probably a good answer on it. What are some ways that you've used or that you recommend people to use to increase their identity and increase their lid?
Yes. Oh man. Okay. I love this. Like I was just thinking about this and, like yesterday actually, and I'm going to give an answer that some people are going to love and some people are going to hate. So one of my favorite, I was thinking about that because I don't know. Okay. This is going to be morbid, but I was thinking about death. And just life and, just life. I was thinking about death. I was just thinking about all this really weird, morose stuff the other day. But I was like, when I think about the short time that I had on this planet, because even 100 years is a short time, comparatively. One of my favorite things about being alive was or is pushing myself to the absolute limit and then actually experiencing a breakdown and then realizing that there was more on the other side. Like there's something about the human capacity and the human limitations that like just doing more than there's like pushing myself. And I know that that can sound unhealthy, which is why I said some people are going to hate this answer, but I don't think that you do this sustainably, like every single day you live in this reality. I do think there's rhythms. Like, for example, there's the sun and the moon, there's day and night, there's awake and there's asleep. So we certainly don't violate this, I believe, God ordained rhythm. But what I am saying is there's something about the human capacity. I love pushing myself to that point of actual, like, how much can we do? And within that, of course, vacation, of course, sleep, of course, Sabbath, rest, of course, all that. So like, let's put that there so no one thinks I'm a psychopath. But I do think that like, every single time that I thought, here's where I think my perceived limit is. And I said, what would happen if I pushed myself all the way up to it? And then I actually broke through another one and then realized, whoa, my ceiling was significantly higher than I thought it was. That was where the breakthrough is. And I think, yeah, a lot of people are afraid to do that because they think like that there's something bad that happens up at that point. But what I found is like, if you find a healthy way to do it, like, for example, I wanted to challenge myself. Can I write a book? And in the midst of everything I'm doing, and that just felt nearly impossible. And then it got to the point where I was like, okay, I've got to push. And then I've got to like schedule staying in hotels so I can lock myself in there and write all day. And then when the book was done, and this was my first book, self-published, I sold over 10,000 copies and hit number one in 4 categories. And I was like, that's crazy. And I actually gave the like first 2,000 copies of the book away and tapped my own savings to do it. Cause I was like, I just want people to hear this message. But I just pushed myself, and then I ended up getting a book deal with the biggest Christian publisher on the planet after that. And I was laughing, being like, I didn't even try. They reached out to me. I was just trying to break a barrier of like, can I do this? And so I don't know I guess what I'm trying to communicate is you're your greatest enemy. And so like a lot of what we perceive as our limitations, like we just made these boundaries up. We don't even know where they're at. We don't even know if they're real. And so and then the thing, I'm like kind of a Steve Jobs fan in a lot of ways. And he had famously said that everything you've ever experienced in life was just done by another human being, just like you. And so sometimes for me, I just try to remind myself of that phenomenon of like, it's just humans doing human things. Why can't I? And so I think a lot of what I'm doing is just pushing myself up to that limit. And I love that feeling of like, whoa, I didn't think that was possible. Now what's next? And just chasing those next levels it's now fun. And I think the last thing I'll say about this is from a physiological perspective, fear and excitement are the same response. Right. So it's like there's 2 kinds of people on roller coasters, the ones that are clutching on like with their feeble attempt to like help survive the experience. And then those other people that just have both their hands in the air, screaming the whole time, enjoying it. It's like fear and exhilaration is literally the same physiological response. So just for me being like, this is fun. This is exciting, I'm excited, versus like the old me would have been like, I'm so scared. Now I'm like, I'm so excited. And I'm feeling the same thing. I'm interpreting it differently. And to me, that's been like something I just kind of coached myself through all the time.
So good. Well, I know we could go forever, but we got to wrap up. So I always ask 3 final questions, and then anything that we didn't touch on that you think our listeners really should hear. So first final question is, if someone's looking for their purpose, what's one sentence you could say that could help them find it?
It's a Christian sentence. I don't have like an adaptation, but what I always tell people, my one-liner is, do what the devil doesn't think you'll do. So it's like, so if you're shy, the devil doesn't think that you'll do something bold. If you talk a lot, the devil doesn't think that you'll be quiet. Do what the devil doesn't think you'll do. Like be the opposite In other words, like be the opposite of what you or other people think that you can be, because there's purpose in that. Like whenever I'm preaching or whatever, I don't know. So I'd rather listen to an introvert talk than an extrovert. And because usually they have some great ideas. So it's like, if an extrovert can say, the devil doesn't think that I'll step into this moment and talk, there's probably significant purpose on the other side of that.
So good. I love that. Number 2, and you kind of already said this, what was your favorite quote and why?
Oh man, my favorite quote. I'm such a dispenser of one-liners, and so I feel like kind of like, you know how musicians always say their favorite song is their newest one. That's how I feel about quotes, you know. So I don't have a favorite one. It's always just what's the newest one. But yeah, so I don't know.
What's one that comes to mind right now?
There's so many. I'm trying to think of like one that would be applicable to the audience. Yeah, there's a quote that it's so simple. It's so simple. Smith Wigglesworth said, "Just believe." And I go back to that quote often because I think what he was getting to at the heart of it is people don't. Like, it's kind of like how Jesus said, just have a mustard seed of faith. And the reason why Jesus said that is because most people have no faith at all. And so it's like that, just believe. And that quote is so simple, yet so profound.
So good. And last and final question, what's one word or sentence you want on your gravestone?
Oh, it's kind of funny more than anything. So my nickname is Doolittle, and it's kind of funny. My nickname being Doolittle. So I thought it'd be funny. Doolittle did a lot.
I like that. That's so cute. That's so cool. So you run into someone in a coffee shop and they're like, "Hey, Mike, that was awesome. Like, got a lot of stuff from that. What's one thing that we didn't touch on today that you think would be that you just feel like, you're led to share?"
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that your mind, one of the things that it's all about how you interpret data. And I just want to empower somebody you used to be a poet. Go back to poetry. Life is poetry, and it's how you interpret it. And I think what happens is, like, anxiety is just bad poetry. It's like, it's the same data. It's just how you're interpreting it. Depression is just bad poetry. It's like, and what I love too about prophetic people is they're always looking to see the meaning in something. Like, what is the deeper meaning? What sign is God trying to send me? What's he trying to communicate to me? And I'd much rather live in that paradigm, because even if you're wrong, you still had a better existence, And so even for people who maybe struggle, I think that's write a better story, write a different story. I used to have like what I consider an orphan spirit, meaning when I was growing up, especially in poverty, I intuitively knew, don't ever ask my mom for anything in the store because we can't afford it. And then now, fast forward, when I go into the store, my girls, they just assume I can buy them anything they want, borderline spoiled, And it was so funny watching my daughters, "Dad, can I get this? Can I have this? Can I have this?" And I'm like, the freedom that they have is the result of their confidence in me. And so it's like, I think people are always like paralyzed by decision. Can I do this? Can I do this? Should I do this? And I think it's the opposite. I think it's like, the more confidence that you have in your creator, the less paralyzed you are to make decisions, because you're just like, why can't I? Like people be like, "I don't know if God wants me to move to Florida." I'm like, what if you picked Florida, but God picked you? So therefore God picked Florida because you picked it. Like, what if it becomes my daughter picking a Barbie? Like, I don't want a Barbie, but my daughter wants it. So yeah, cool. I picked a Barbie. And I think that, to me, is one of my life themes, of just being okay with like enjoying life and being okay with God. You're not a human doing, you're a human being. And it's like, I have to remind myself all the time, because I think for me, there's a tendency to strive, like I think that, and so just reminding myself, like, not a human doing. I'm a human being, and I chose this, but God chose me, so God chose this, and I'm okay with that. And so I don't know if that helped anybody, but hopefully it'll just, getting back to the simplicity of enjoying life through that lens is so important.
Wow, that's so good. Be a human being, not a human doing. Our Father in heaven looks after us and wants the best for us. So I think that's amazing. Guys, I know you want to share this. Make sure to share it, rate, review, subscribe. We'll have all of Mike's information in the show notes. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to him. I know he's super helpful on all different levels. And let's go out there. Let's change the world one starfish or one person at a time. If we can help one person at a time together, we can change the world. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you.